During World War II, the Nazis made many unusual weapons, some of which were used in battles, while others remained just ideas. Some of these weapons were scary and used advanced technology that was new to most people. They caused fear among soldiers and civilians. Many of these weapons were groundbreaking and inspired the weapons we have today. However, some were just strange. Here are a few examples of these remarkable weapons. Number 1. The V1. The V1, known by different names like Cherry Stone, Maybug Buzz Bomb, and Doodlebug, was a scary weapon used by Nazi Germany. It was the first cruise missile ever made and was meant to scare enemies. The Nazis started launching V1s at London on June 13, 1944, right after the Allies landed in Normandy. They launched lots of them every day at first, but as the Allies moved east, the V1s had to target areas further east too, like the Netherlands and Belgium. Allies defended against V1s using barrage balloons, anti-aircraft guns, and sometimes risky tactics like flipping them in the air with fighter planes. The V1s were effective because they were cheap for Germany to make, and they made Britain spend a lot of effort defending against them. By the end of the war, Germany had launched many thousands of V1s. Number 2. The Schwerer Gustav. The Schwerer Gustav was the biggest artillery gun ever made. It was built to destroy French forts but wasn't ready in time for that. It did get used later in the war during the siege of Sevastopol, where it shot massive 800mm shells and destroyed a deep underground munitions depot. The gun was so massive, weighing 1,490 tons and needing 250 people to operate it. It had to be set up on special tracks, with trenches dug, and then assembled before firing. Number 3. Panzer VIII Maus. The Maus was a huge armored vehicle, the biggest of its kind ever made. It weighed 207 tons and was 33 feet long. Although 5 were planned, only 2 were built. In late 1944, they tested its 128mm gun, which could destroy any Allied armored vehicles from far away. But there were big problems. It was hard to find an engine powerful enough but small enough to fit in the vehicle. It could only go as fast as 14 miles per hour and was too heavy for most bridges. They planned for it to go through rivers with a snorkel, capable of going under 26 feet of water. The war ended before the Maus could fight. The Russians got hold of the prototypes and sent one to a tank museum in Moscow. Number 4. The Horten Ho 229. During World War II, Hermann Göring, a German politician, military leader, and convicted war criminal, asked for a light bomber that could carry 1,000 kilograms of bombs for 1,000 kilometers at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Engineers came up with a flying wing design to meet this demand. This new aircraft, called the Ho 229, was a special project like many other advanced German weapons at the time. However, it never went beyond the prototype stage. Only 3 were built, and they were only tested, never used in actual combat. After the war, tests showed that the Ho 229 had a smaller radar signature compared to other planes of its time, but the difference was not huge. Even though it was harder to detect on radar, the Ho 229 speed made it difficult to intercept. Today, the only remaining piece of the Ho 229 is part of the 3rd prototype, which is on display at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. Number 5. The V2. One of Hitler's famous weapons was the V2, which came after the V1 and was the first long-range guided missile. It was Hitler's way of getting back at the Allies for bombing German cities, and it started hitting Allied cities in September 1944. More than 3,000 V2 missiles were launched during the war, killing over 9,000 civilians. But the biggest tragedy was the over 12,000 forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners who died making these weapons. The V2's guidance system was a big challenge for the Allies because it used complex gyroscopes that couldn't be jammed. At first, the British thought it used radio guidance, but their attempts to block it failed because it flew at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The V2 was super fast and couldn't be stopped. It hit without warning and silently. They were launched from hidden mobile platforms in forests, making it hard for Allied bombers to find and destroy them. After the war, both the Soviets and Western Allies tried to get as many V2 missiles and German scientists as they could. Wernher von Braun, a top scientist on the V-2 program, was captured by the Americans and helped start America's space program. The Soviets also used V-2 technology for their space program, launching Sputnik using a rocket based on the V-2. Number 6. Me-262 Schwab. The Me-262 Schwab was the first jet-powered fighter plane globally and one of Hitler's most famous aircraft. It could have been used earlier, but there were problems with the metal used, the engines, and political issues. It finally started flying in April 1944. The main 262 was so good in the air that Allies had to destroy it on the ground or while taking off and landing because they couldn't stop it once it was flying. If the Me-262 had been used earlier, it could have made a big difference. But there weren't enough made because Germany had trouble getting good materials due to Allied bombings, which slowed down production. So they focused on making planes that were easier to build.